This is Gemara Metziah Daf Yod Ches, and one more time with Purim on the horizon. If anyone would like to partner for those dafim, please reach out. I'm holding the top of Yechesam and Aleph. We're in the middle of a segue, a sidebar sugya. We're in the middle of discussing. Really, this brings us back to our days in Gittin. We're in the middle of discussing an almana min ha'irisin. Do they get a ksuba or not? Again, we know there's two stages of marriage. There's irisin, there's nisuin. Irisin being more of engagement, but obviously with tanayim, etc. Nisuin being the full-fledged marriage. And the question is, what happens if the husband dies after only irisin was done? Does this woman get her ksuba? So the Gemara says, yes. And the Gemara was in the middle of trying to prove that not only would the almana from the irisin get her ksuba, but she'll even get the ksuba. Excuse me. Even if no ksuba was actually written. And the reason we got into this discussion is the overarching sugya which we're talking about, which is a Maisa Bezdin. Can one claim against a Maisa Bezdin? That's our discussion. So says the Gemara on the top of Yechesam and Aleph, the second line, Ve'ela will prove that is this arusa, this woman that did irisin, could yes get her ksuba even without it being written down. Midetani Rav Chia Barami, from Rav Chia Barami, Ishtay arusa teaches Rav Chia Barami if the aros dies. Loi oini. Now we're switching it. We're going to prove it from the flip side, dinim. What is the husband's status when his wife dies as an arusa? Ishtay arusa la oinin v'loi metamela. He doesn't have a din of aninos. If he's a kohen, he's not allowed to become impure to her. V'chein he, and so too she. If he dies, loi nenes, loi metames, loi mesa. What happens if she dies? Eino yarsha, he does not inherit her. Mesu, goivek subasa. She gets her ksuba. So what do we see? We seemingly see clearly the Brisa doesn't say anything about there is a ksuba, there isn't a ksuba. The Brisa says a case of an arusa. What is the halacha? She gets her ksuba. Says the Gemara, no raya, don't with the kasavla. Maybe this is a case in which the ksuba was actually written. If you're going to say that's the kasavla, I remember what's the chiddush. I'll tell you what the chiddush is. The chiddush is that when she dies, he does not inherit her. And the reason is, that's the chiddush of the price, excuse me. And the fact that she gets her ksuba, that's only parenthetic. And indeed, there was a ksuba. You're right, it's not such a chiddush. But this brisa was quoted for the other dinim in the brisa. Ella, says the Gemara, is still trying to look for a source that this arusa gets her ksuba without the actual ksuba. Abaya is going back onto the Mishnah itself. Where 10 lines down, Yilchesam and Aleph. The first word on the line is B'Makayim. If you're going to tell me that we're discussing a case in which they did not write up a ksuba, talking about a case where no ksuba was written, to get hainu ksuba, so like we suggested in the bottom of the bait yesterday, and the get is indeed her ksuba, then ought to get manu Messiahim ksivei. What does that have anything to do with manu Messiahim? The get just shows she's divorced. Asks Abaya fundamentally, how do we suggest that her get is her ksuba? How does the get show she did or did not get her ksuba? Maybe you're going to suggest, give the kin Rabbana the mikvah. Once the Rabbana made a takana that when one gets divorced, she gets a ksuba. So now by holding your get, demand the kasabei dummy, then it's as if, that in a place where there is no ksuba, it's as if it's written in the get, litain v'lema parati. He could just say, yeah, it's true. But I paid you. What's your proof that I didn't pay you? Shkayach, you have a get. Yes, he says he divorced her, but he says he paid. And you're going to suggest that what? We're going to tell him, Iparata, Ibailachal you paid her, you should have ripped it up. Ripped up what? The get? Amar lo and Shavaktan. She doesn't not gonna let me rip up the get. Why? Because Amra Bina Len Suvebe. She wants to get remarried. If she wants to get remarried, she's gonna have to have the get. So the husband should always be able to claim he paid. Why? Because there's no reason to say that. The fact that she's holding a get does not talk to the monetary obligation of the ksuba. Maybe you're going to suggest Amrina lei ibaylachal mikraya. You should rip up the get umichtav agabe gita, and then you should have written that what gita denande karninu, this get that we ripped up. Lo mishav the gita psulo, should have wrote a document. It's not because it's possible, and yes, this woman can remarry. Hata called him mikveh beidina mikveh. Says the Gemara, does this always happen? Does everyone always pay back the ksuba and bezdin? No. So it could be he did indeed pay her back. So therefore, says the Gemara, the fact that we have a get proves absolutely nothing. And therefore, says Abaya from the Mishnah, what do we see? That you have no ne'amanos to claim against a Maisa Bezdin. Again, because in this case, the fact that she's holding the get, it could be a makom she'ein kaising suba. The get does not prove me anything. And the simple reason is, there's the Tanai Bezdin. What's the Tanai Bezdin? To pay ksuba. The husband wants to claim that. You don't have an amanus against a Maisa Bezdin, which of course proves that which we said on the top of Yud Zayin Amud Base, which is where we got into this discussion. Call Maisa Bezdin Kamandana Kishtar Biyade Dami, and you don't have any Namanis, of course, unless you have Adim, etc. And that's the reason why in this case he would have to pay her the ksuba, because he doesn't have Adim, and it's a Maisa Bezdin to pay a ksuba. Continues the Mishnah towards the bottom of Yeches Amar Aleph. Matzah Giti Nashim Shechura Avadim. Continuing, different documents that could be found. Someone finds a document of divorce, a document that evidence was freed, Taitiki, which is a document that's written when one is critically and deathly ill on his deathbed. Matana, a document of a gift. V'shavrim, a receipt. Harei ze lo yachzir. You don't return these documents. Why? Because maybe they were not actually actualized. Maybe these documents were in to give a gift, to give a divorce, to free an Eved, but maybe it didn't actually happen, and therefore you do not return them. Says the Gemara, what's the reason that you don't return it? As we just said, because maybe you didn't actually give them. But says the Gemara, that if he would say to give them back, then we would listen to him. What do we see from the Mishnah? Seemingly we see from the Mishnah that's only because we're chayshish for what? Dinimlach, he changed his mind. But let's say the person that wrote the document says, no, I did divorce my wife. I did indeed free this Eved, give this matana, etc. We would return the document, afilu izman meruba, even after a long time. Asks the Gemara 10 lines at the bottom, I'll ask you a stira. Maybe get avni menu. If someone, Fishliach, brings a get and he loses it, Matzal Alter, he finds it right away. Kosher, he can give it to the woman as a divorce, and not apostle. What do we see? It's only kosher right away. But in our case, we just said, Afilu Zman Meruba. It's going to be kosher. Amar Rabba loy kasha. As we learned in Gittin, it depends how common the caravans are to travel. If the caravans travel constantly, so then it could be that it was someone else and it wasn't this person, whereas if the caravans don't normally travel so much, therefore there's not as much a concern that there's such an identical get that came from someone else, therefore you would, yes, return it. Va'afilu, and continues the Gemara on this din of Rabbah, 5 lines from the bottom. Va'afilu b'magish sheretz mitzuyos. even in a place in which there are caravans normally traveling, but it's only where there's two people with the same name, that's when you would not return it. Proves the Gemara, Kasha Derabba Derabba. Because if not, we'd have a stira in Rabba. What's the stira in Rabba? Dahugita. Of the get Shachach Beitina de Ravuna that was found in the Bezdin of Ravuna, Davikasa Bey that was written Bishaviri Masad al Rachas Nahara. The get was written in Shaviri, a town of the river of Rachas, and a shliach was made by someone in Shaviri to bring the get, and he said he lost the get, and this is it. Amar Ravuna, says Ravuna, as we turn over to Yodches Amid Beis Chayshinan, we have to be concerned the Shnei Shaviri, and we would not return the get. V'amar lei, and Rav Chisda said to Rabba, Rav Chisda Rabba, Poik ayin ba, go and check. To learn to buy minach, they're going to ask you, Ravuna, nafak tak v'ashkich t'tanan, kol maisa bezdin areze yachzir. You should yes return it. So what do we see? That we're not concerned that people have the exact same names. That's a stira in Rav Huna. Says the Gemara of Albeidina de Ravuna, the Metziah Tami. The Bezdin Ravuna was a hustling and bustling place, and therefore it has the same din as Shayaris Mitzuyais. There are caravans constantly, people always are traveling, and yet so how are we going to reconcile these two cases? If there's Shayaris Mitzuyais, do you yes return it or not? Alma, what do we see? Says the Gemara. The only time we would not return it if it's hochzak, if it's clear that two people have the same name. If not, then we would indeed return it. Says the Gemara, 8 lines down, the first one line is Yosef, a story. Ovid Rabba Uvdam, Rabba did a story, Bekisna, the Pumpadisa. And if all this sounds familiar, it should, because we had this mamish at the beginning of Gittin. Bekisna, the Pumpadisa, that was found in the flax house, Pumpadisa, Kishmaitse, like his teaching. Some say the Mizmin Kisna, so they sold the flax, and therefore there's no chsik of two people the same name, Afagav, the Shchich Sheyarta, even though such an area has a lot of traffic, it's as if there's the caravans traveling. And there's some that say it's a place where they soak the flax, Afagav, the Ochsiku, to Loy Shchich Sheyarta. So 2 ways of learning, proving the din of Rabbah, that we're only actually concerned that we wouldn't return an item if it's hochzak, if it's clear that 2 people have the same name. Continues the Gemara Rav Zeira. About 12 lines down, the first one line is Rav Zeira. Rav Zeira Rami Mastisa Nabraisa Umeshani, and he answered it up. And we're going to come to, again, similar dinim of finding a get Isha. Tanan, here's the Mishnah. And he asked the stira. She returned to Katani Mias, what do we learn? We would yes return to So we see a stira. Again, this is the exact same thing that we started off our Gemara. We just started off our Gemara, bringing a dig from our Mishnah, and then ask Yakasha. Rav Zira asked it straight. Rami Mastisan on the Braisa. Meshani Kamak Shishos Kamak Chena Shayarais Mitsuais. Igadiamri. There are some that learn Vusha Hochsiku till Loin Nehedar Vahainu Tirabba. That it's when it's Hochsak, 2 people have the same name. That's when you do not return it, just like Rabbah said. There's some that learn Avagav to Loy Hochsiku, even if there's no Chazaka, 2 people have the same name, Lo Nehedar Upligi de Rabbah, and Rav Zera will be arguing on Rabbah. So Rav Zera asking a similar stira from the Mishnah to Braisa with the same answer. Machlek is whether he's going with the Rabbah's din, the secondary qualification of Hochsku Shnei Yosef Shimon, or not. Says the Gemara, Bishlama, Rabba Lamik Rav Zera. I understand why Rabba didn't learn like Rav Zera. Why not? Because Masnisan Alim Lelek Shuye. Rabba was happier to ask from the Mishnah. Al Rav Zera might tell Malamar Rabba. Lamaisa, why did Rav Zera learn like Rabba? Why do you ask from the Braisa, Amlacha, Mikatani, Hamar Tenu Naistim, our Mishnah wasn't explicit, but Filuz Mamaruba was a diuk. Amar Tenu Naistim, Ula Oilam, Kedekaim Elan, La Alter. So Rav Zera says our Mishnah is not explicit. Our Mishnah was a diuk. That's what he asked from the diuk from the Braisa, which was more verbose, more explicit. Says the Gemara, Leman Damar. We had two ways of learning Rav Zera. One, it was just like Rabba, one was not. Leman Damar, the Rav Zera, Maksha Sheres Mitzuyos, and Afal Gav. So what would the machlekes Rabba and Rav Zera be? Rabba suffered the katani komaisa bezdin reize yachsir tishtachach bebezdin askina. It's only if it's mamish in bezdin. O bezdin kimakshers mitzuyos. Voshe ochsiku lo yachsir lo yochsiku yachsir. What does Rav Zera hold? Rav Zera amelacha mika tani komaisa bezdin shtimsu bebezdin. Doesn't say it was found in bezdin. What does it say? Komaisa bezdin yachsir katani uloilam. That what? He was found outside, and that's going to be the machlekes Rav Zera versus Rabba, and how to explain the machlekes Rav Zera versus Rabba. Says the Gemara, continuing on this theme of get. Rav Yirmiyah, we're 10 lines from the end of the Amud. First line is Avroi. Rav Yirmiyah, Mar Kigoin. The case is where the Eidim said we only signed on one get of Yosef ben Shimon. In such a scenario, we could return it because we don't have to worry. There's another one because the Eidim said we only signed on one. What's the Chiddush, says the Gemara? Maybe the next level concern. Maybe not only are the two Yosef and Shimons, but there's even two Eidim with the same name. So the fact that these Eidim signed, it's true, but maybe there were another Eidim. Kamash Mallah, and that's too far. We don't have to be worried about that. We'll pick it up from Ravashi in the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.